Bismillah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi man wala. Allahumma salli wa sallim wa zid wa barik ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. First of all, it's good to see people after the break. Alhamdulillah. Hope everyone had a beautiful time on Eid with their families and their friends, inshallah. Now that this Eid has passed and we're getting kind of largely through the summer, that means that we've got into the time of the year where we don't usually have as many interruptions in schedule. So inshallah, we'll be here on Sundays. We won't have these breaks anymore, inshallah, as long as everyone's healthy and stuff like that. But inshallah, we'll continue. Alhamdulillah, we returned on Wednesday from what I personally believe and was the best trip that we've been on in our lives. Alhamdulillah. Better than even Umrah, better than Hajj. So we pray that inshallah, all of us will have a chance to go to this beautiful land. We went to Medellin in Colombia. Spent about 10 days there. Some of the old Majlis people probably know that there's a couple of the core families that were started off with us in the very beginning, before the Majlis even existed as a legal body. There was a couple brothers and their mom who were very close with us, and the mother, Auntie Carmen, she's from Medellin, and Hassan and Yusuf obviously are her sons, and so they grew up here in Los Angeles, but they would go to Medellin in the summers pretty much every year, and so they grew up there and they speak Spanish and everything else, and they moved back there a couple years ago, and they've been trying to do their thing. So alhamdulillah, we had the opportunity to go visit them, spend about 10 days there. And it was a really, really remarkable trip, mashallah. So many things that you really can't explain. We just pray that Allah gives them tawfiq and Allah helps them and helps them to do what they're trying to do and establish what they're trying to establish. And inshallah, if they're able to do that, then all of us will be able to go. And people will be able to go and visit and see that community and spend time there and meet the people there. Really, really beautiful people, a very beautiful place, mashallah. Yeah, everything else can't really be said, not because it's secret, but because it just you wouldn't get it. Like if you weren't there and you didn't go through it, you wouldn't get it. But alhamdulillah, it was it's really amazing, alhamdulillah. And many of the core volunteers of their project are people who actually used to come to the Majlis also, like Majd Musa and his family, and Majd Yusuf and his family. And then one of our Majlis people now, Majid and Najwa. Many of you probably know Majid and Najwa. Majid is actually from Medellin. He was born and raised there, and then he moved here. So he joined us for the trip, and Sheikh Fuad and his family joined us for the trip. And alhamdulillah, it was really remarkable. Alhamdulillah, we had Jummah there, and we got to meet some of the community. We got to see the land that they intend to build like a masjid on and a school and things like that. So inshallah, Allah give them tawfiq. The etiquette of the bearers of the Quran. We left off on the chapter on the etiquette of the bearers of the Quran. قال المصنف رحمه الله تعالى ونفعنا الله وإياكم بعلومه في الدارين آمين. We're going to try to move through some content today. I don't want to spend more than a couple more sessions on this book, so Inshallah, we're going to try to move today. I believe we covered last time this idea of reciting as a means of livelihood. We talked about it. Suffice it to say that the scholars differed on whether or not one should be paid, can be paid for reciting and teaching the Quran. But the scholars differed. So what is the khulasatul qawl, the grand takeaway on this? The grand takeaway is, if we want to have people who are specialized in teaching the Quran and learning the Quran and knowing the Quran, and we want generation upon generation of people to be able to do that, then it seems common sense that people are going to have to get paid for it. It's just not going to happen otherwise, most likely. At the same time, this, as many matters of religious teaching, should not become games. They should not become ploys. They should not become gimmicks. They should not become subject to the whims and fancies of whatever marketing techniques are most common at any particular time. And people should just teach. And usually that means that the community will have to figure out somehow, some sort of way that people can do that and still live a dignified life. And inshallah, we can try to figure that out together. So reciting as a means of livelihood, that's the short of it. If you were to say, what is the most taqwa position on this, is you don't take any money for teaching the Quran or reciting the Quran. But that's the default. If you can get away with it, alhamdulillah, that's great. But are we going to have people who can really recite and teach the Quran then? No. Unless we believe that it's not that difficult of a thing. Which, to be quite honest, I think in many parts of our community, what we really believe deep down inside is that teaching religion and knowing the religion is actually a really easy thing that anyone can do. And people who teach and study the religion don't really deserve to be compensated in any sort of way that allows them to put their time into that. Deep down inside, I think large portions of our community actually believe this. To be honest, I don't really blame them. They probably haven't really seen the greatest things from religious teachers, and they probably are very ignorant of the religion in the first place. So, I don't blame them for that, but hopefully we can do better, inshallah. It's true in a sense that reciting the Quran is probably easier than it is to be a religious scholar. Just to put that out there. Memorizing the Quran probably is going to take you a year or two. Mastering its recitation might take you also, a couple years, depending on how good you are, what kind of teachers you find, stuff like that. If you're going to memorize all of the various qira'at and stuff, it might take you a good 8-10 years. But it's still only 8-10 years. And I think in the modern context, to really be a scholar in the religion, it's going to take you absolute minimum 10 years. And that's if all the systems were in place and all of the resources were good and so on and so forth, which really isn't the case. So, but we want, in the end, out of our love for the religion, we want people who study the religion and act upon it to be treated decently. Allah give us tawfiq. Next is continually completing the Quran. Basically, the point here is that the person who has memorized the Quran or who is seeking to memorize the Quran should regularly be completing it. Should try to complete it as much as they possibly can. As I've said before, part of the good benefit of teaching from books is that, Assalamu alaikum, mashallah, Assalamu alaikum, Tony, good to see you too, mashallah. Part of the good thing about teaching from books is that I'm not making a claim to it. So I'm teaching you what Imam Al-Nawawi said. This is a well-known text. I want to live up to it just as much as anyone else would want to live up to it, But the principle still remains. The principle is that they say that it's good for a person should try to finish the Quran at least every 30 days. They would say this is the minimum, to finish the Quran every 30 days. Many of the Salaf, many of the righteous people, they used to finish it every 7 days. They would finish it every 5 days, every 3 days. 3 days is kind of the max as in terms of how fast a person should be doing it outside of Ramadan. Inside of Ramadan is a little bit different. Sometimes many of the ulama and salihin and stuff, they would finish the Quran every day in Ramadan. Some of them finish twice in a day in Ramadan. It sounds unbelievable to us because it's just so distant to us, right? I hear 30 days and I'm like, well, 30 days is going to take some work, you know? But this was common for them actually. And I've mentioned before, like locally we have someone like Sheikh, I think he's still local, Sheikh Muhib, Hafidhullah. Sheikh Muhib is a Hafid on the 10 Qira'at. He reviews 5 juz a day. It takes him about an hour and 15 minutes. So, you know, it's doable. Hour and 15 minutes, 5 juz, times 6. You might finish the whole Quran in like 5 hours. At night, you finish in 5 hours. During the day, you finish in 5 hours. Live a very simple life. You could do it theoretically. Then perhaps there's other issues involved here, which we don't have to really get into so much, but some of these people, they had time didn't function the same for them. Believe it, don't believe it. It's like mutawatir in our history books. Some people, their time didn't function the same way as everyone else's time functioned. Point here is that we should try to read the Quran. We should try to finish the Quran. We should push ourselves, but we shouldn't push ourselves too hard. That we don't do it. Basic takeaway. Read the Quran. Try to finish it as often as you can. And don't turn it into a burden. Okay? Don't turn it into a burden. I can guarantee you these people are reading the Quran in 3 days, and 5 days, and 7 days. It wasn't a burden for them. They enjoy every single letter. So, you know, don't make it a burden. Don't make it a hardship, and try to read as much as we can, inshallah. It's good when we finish the reading of the Quran to invite people. Some of the Sahaba, they used to do that. When they would finish their reciting of the entire Quran, they would invite their family members, their relatives, to be present when they finish, and they make the dua. It's especially good to recite at night, because there's special merit, of course, to the last third of the night, as we know from the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that Allah comes to the lowest heaven. Understand that in a way that is befitting for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And He answers the du'as and so on and so forth. So the last third is good. And night is good also in general, because the night is filled with fewer distractions. It's filled with fewer distractions. I feel that some of these things we're losing touch with because of technology. If we can try to do it, we should try to do it. Try to have some sort of policy for yourself. Like after X o'clock, we're not going to have phones out. We're not going to watch television. We're not going to just do what people used to do. You know, like it's not a bad thing to do what people used to do. People used to do what? They just sit there. That's it. You know, when we were driving to the airport from Medellin, we were driving through these, like, the brother was telling me that even middle class people in the past, not now, property and everything has changed, but in the past, even middle class people would have like a small little piece of property that they go to on the weekends. So like we had a taxi driver. He said the taxi driver, for example, his family has a piece of land they go to on the weekends. He's a taxi driver, but like they go there, they sit there, they have a little piece of grass, a little piece of land. They maybe grow some things. They have maybe some goats and stuff, some chickens, and you just spend the weekend. Right? And it reminded me of Masr, actually. It reminded me a lot of Egypt, because it's very common in Egypt too. So we're driving to the airport, and we drive by this one house, and there was an older man with like a hat. Kind of, you can tell he's worked a lot in the sun and stuff. And he's just sitting there. Yeah, nobody's with him. He's just sitting there in front of his house, watching people drive by. And I thought to myself, like, how beautiful is that? Like, this is how much we've lost. Like, we've lost so much. That's such a beautiful thing. So 8 o'clock comes, 9 o'clock comes, just turn all this stuff off. Just sit there. It's okay. 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, hour. Have some tea. If someone's with you, talk to them. If nobody's with you, just stare at the wall. It's okay. Like, it's actually okay to do that. And it'll be good for you. It'll be good for other people too. Inshallah. The first night that we arrived, I had a funny experience. I don't know if it's universal or not. They told me it's kind of indicative. So I was like, let's go somewhere, you know. So we go to this mall or something, and there's a coffee shop. So like, we have to get some coffee. So we go into the coffee shop, and there's not really very many people in the coffee shop. Maybe like a couple people. They already have their food. They already have their coffee, and there's like 4 or 5 people working there. So we come in and we order the coffee, like 2 drinks and 2 croissants or something. Very simple order. And we're sitting there. We're sitting there. We're sitting there. Like a good 15 minutes passes. There's no food, no drinks. I'm like, man, what is going on? 20 minutes, and then like the food, the drinks come, everything. I was like, is this normal? I was like, yeah, it's actually pretty normal. And at first I was a little bit agitated because, we're in Southern California and like everything has to happen really quickly. And there needs to be like, why is it taking so long, and efficiency and productivity and like, all of these kind of things. And then after I kind of like got over that for a second, because I don't have anywhere to go. Like, we're not doing anything. So it's like, so this is what it's like. He's like, yeah, it's not atypical. And I just kind of stopped and I was like, that's really nice. Like, alhamdulillah. Alhamdulillah that can be normal for them, that they can live a life like that where 15 minutes to get a cup of coffee is okay. And like anyone who comes to sit and get a cup of coffee, it's assumed that they're coming to sit and get a cup of coffee and they're going to sit here for an hour and talk to each other and enjoy each other's company. And like, that's really nice, actually. MashaAllah, people live like that. So just sit there. And the point is, the reading of the Quran at night, I don't think we can understand it unless we do that other thing. That's the whole point of everything that I'm saying. So if we don't get out of the technology, if we don't stop, just turn our brains off, stop worrying about things, stop thinking about things, stop thinking about the next thing that needs to get done and the next thing that needs to get done and the next thing that needs to get done, and the endless busyness that we have, we're not going to understand this emphasis on reading Quran at nighttime. But if we can stop long enough to really feel what nighttime is supposed to feel like, then maybe we can understand what it means to recite the Quran. The other thing is that we should try to retain whatever it is that we've memorized from the Quran. There's a very scary hadith in this, that the Prophet ﷺ said, the rewards of my nation were shown to me, even the litter a man removes from the mosque. And the sins of my nation were shown to me. I did not see a sin greater than a chapter or a verse of the Quran given to a person who then forgot it. So this is very scary, of course. I've seen an interpretation on this that means that to forget it means that you actually can't even read it anymore. Not just that you've forgotten its memorization. Like if you were to be shown it, you wouldn't be able to read it. It's a very generous interpretation. I kind of like it. But, may Allah forgive us. The idea is we should try to keep it. Allah forgive us. I don't want to say anything more about that. The etiquette of recitation. The etiquette of recitation. Here's where we're going to move kind of quickly. So there's certain things that have already been mentioned, like that they should be sincere. These are obligations. Person should be sincere when they recite. Person should, observe certain things, like maybe, but these are more etiquettes. They're not required, but they're good things to do. So we're going to try to go through these kind of quickly. Number one, etiquette of reciting the Quran is to use the miswak. Basically, to clean one's mouth. You could use the miswak. You could use something else. Use a toothbrush. If you don't have anything, use your finger. Brush your teeth with your finger. But just something to kind of clean the mouth a little bit before reciting. Number two is to have wudu, or to be in a state of purity, if you're able to be so. Be in a state of purity and recite. Is it required? No, it's not required. Like if you don't have wudu, you can recite the Quran, but it's better to have wudu. If you're going to, if this etiquette of not having wudu is going to make it so that you don't recite Quran at all, then just recite the Quran. It's going to be okay. Now, it's an important point. Like if you want to do something good, but you're missing one of the etiquettes of it or something, and you're missing that etiquette of it is going to make it so that you don't do it, it's probably better to just do it. Like, don't get so caught up. Like, there's going to be, people do this all the time with dua, right? And then they start saying funny things. Like someone will go visit a grave. Go visit the grave, you say salam to the people in the graves, right? You make dua for them. People will be like, why are you making dua to the people in the grave? Well, what do you mean? Like, what do you mean making, well, you're facing the grave. Do you have to face the qibla when you make dua? Is it tell me, is it obligatory? Is it recommended? Do you have to face the qibla when you make dua? No, right? When the imam finishes salah and they turn around and they make dua, are they facing the qibla? They're not facing the qibla, right? Their back actually is to the qibla. Because like, don't get too like, oh, I have to do this and I have to do this and I have to do this, and then they stop doing anything at all. But it's good to have wudu if you're going to recite the Quran. If you're not able to make wudu, if you don't have access to water, so on and so forth, you can make tayammum, recite the Quran. The place of recitation, it would be nice if the place that you recite is a place of cleanliness, it's a place of nobility. But again, you can recite anywhere. There's certain places that are probably not really polite to recite in, because maybe good things don't happen there, or I guess probably it's not the most polite thing to recite in the shower. It's not really good to mention the name of Allah in the bathroom in general. If you're in like, I don't know, maybe like a dump yard, like a landfill, it's probably not the best place to recite Quran. You could, but it's not the best place. Right? The point is just we want to keep the respect for the Quran in our heart. So sometimes that means that we sit properly, we have wudu, we face the qibla, but it's not that it has to be that way. You might be in a place like that, but you're reciting Quran for a particular reason, right? Like maybe you're in a place where a lot of corruption is happening, but you're reciting a verse that has to do with protection, or a verse that has to do with guiding people, or whatever. And you're reciting in that place, it's okay. Like okay. Another one is to seek protection, to say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. Before we start reciting, we say A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim. It's not required, but it's an important etiquette. We also say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You start reciting. You don't have to do it like, do it at the beginning of the recitation. Of course, if you're reciting Surah At-Tawbah, there's no Bismillah in the beginning of Surah At-Tawbah, so you wouldn't do that. But A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, recite. If you get to the beginning of a surah, then you can do the Bismillah again, right? So maybe you're reading and you finish one surah, you get to another surah, you can do Bismillah again. Right? Another etiquette of reciting the Quran is to have humility and to ponder its meaning. I think that there's different ways that you could recite the Quran. Sometimes you're reciting the Quran to finish a certain amount, which is okay. There's a barakah in the Quran, there's a blessing in the Quran. You're reciting to finish, that's okay. But sometimes we should recite the Quran to reflect. I want to reflect upon it. I want to think about its meaning. And so in that case, it's probably more useful for us to define what we're doing, not by quantity, but by quantity of reading, but quantity of time. So to say, for example, not I want to read 1 page, or I want to read 5 pages, or something like that. You say, I want to read for 30 minutes. For 30 minutes, you sit down and read. You might read 1 verse. And that's actually probably going to be good. If you spend that much time with 1 verse, 2 verses, 3 verses, 4 verses, they usually become part of they kind of become part of you. Because now you spend so much time with it that you're not going to forget it. You might think about it, you have some lessons from it, you have some reflections from it, you tie it to some things going on with you, you look up the meaning on some things, it becomes part of what you're able to remember, inshallah. And to have humility with it, to ponder it. But one of the most important etiquettes of the Quran is that we come to it wanting guidance, seeking guidance. I'm coming to you, like, this is your book, Allah. Please give me some guidance from this. Help me to understand this, and open it for me so that I can comprehend. It can become part of who I am, so on. Ibrahim al-Khawas, who was one of the early righteous people, he said there are 5 medicines for the heart. 5 medicines for the heart. Ibrahim al-Khawas. Reciting the Quran with reflection. So this is the first one, that's this topic, right? Reciting the Quran with reflection. Notice he specifically mentions with reflection. Reciting the Quran is a medicine, of course, but to really think about it is a different kind of medicine. The second one is to empty the stomach. Third one is to stand in the night in prayer. Fourth is to supplicate in the last part of the night. And the fifth is sitting with righteous people. So these are the remedies for the heart. The remedies for the heart. Recite the Quran with reflection, empty the stomach, stand in the night in prayer, pray in the last part of the night, sit with the righteous people. Another etiquette of reciting the Quran is to cry. It's to cry. It's not going to happen if there's not any serious connection with the meaning, right? There has to be some level of connection with the meaning, and then maybe we can get ourselves to cry. It's important to recognize that getting ourselves to cry is an important spiritual practice. If we're not accustomed to it, we should try it. We should try to do it. And there's any number of ways that can happen, but we think that many of us, the American culture that I came from was a culture that didn't cry. I think it's changed at some level, but for me at least, it was an American culture that didn't cry. And many of our kind of like Eastern cultures that we come from, they also don't really cry, you know? And it's good to cry. At times that are appropriate and good, like, you know, if you're crying over everything all the time to the point that it becomes dysfunctional, it's probably some looking into that needs to happen. But there are many times in our lives where we should really cry. And the strongest people in all of history, they did this. You know, like Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu, he has a beautiful statement one time where he came upon the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and Abu Bakr, and they were crying. And he said, what is it that causes you to cry? So that I may also cry, and if it doesn't cause me to cry, I'll basically make myself cry at the back end. Like I'll force myself to cry out of camaraderie. Like you guys are crying, so I'm going to cry too. But tell me what it is, because maybe it will touch my heart too, right? And like there's an importance to this. That the heart should be it should be touchable. It should be touchable. That you know. There's many things that are so beautiful, they're worth crying about. They really are worth crying about. I'll just leave it there. Another etiquette is to try to recite in a way that's clear, right? Like to recite with tajweed essentially. And the idea of tajweed is that you give every single letter its due. You give it its haqq. You give every single letter its haqq. Every single thing that you're pronouncing, you give it its due. So to recite with tajweed is to give every piece of it its due, again, out of respect to the Quran. Another etiquette is to make dua while reciting. So especially in the optional prayers, the Prophet ﷺ used to do this, that if he's reciting the Quran in optional prayers and he comes across a verse that has to do with the punishment of Allah, he seek protection from it. If he comes across a verse that has to do with reward, he'd make dua for it. So this is also a way to keep the heart alive and attentive in the recitation. So you're reciting and you come across, Ya Allah, protect us from that. Ya Allah, give us that. Ya Allah, all of these things. It's good to do also. It's good to recite in order. You don't have to, but it's good to recite in order. Definitely within the surah, you should do it in order. But between the surahs, it's good to do it in order. You understand what I'm saying? So like if you're reading Surah Al-Duha, don't jump to like, I don't know, فَأَمَّا الْيَتِيمَ فَلَا تَقْهَرْ, and then, go to the beginning and don't move around inside the surah. Inside the surah, it's good to maintain order. Like wherever you start, go from there. And then in between the surahs, it's good too. Especially if you're reciting to finish, you want to keep your order. It's good. Again, it's just etiquette. It's good to recite from memory, but it's actually better to recite from the Mus'haf. Al-Nawawi says this. It says reciting the Quran from the Mus'haf is better than reciting it from memory because it combines reciting with looking. So when you recite from the Mus'haf, not only are you reading the Quran, but you're also looking at the Quran. There's extra merit in that, in addition to just the recitation by itself. But reciting in a group is, he says, no, the group recitation is a recommended act, as is attending the circles of doing so. The Prophet ﷺ said, a group does not gather in one of the houses of Allah Most High reciting the Quran and studying it together, except that tranquility descends upon them, mercy envelops them, the angels encompass them, and Allah mentions them to those in His presence. Subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's good to do it together. He says there's two good ways to read together. The first is for the whole group to read everything together. The second is for each of them to do a certain part. You may have seen this in Morocco. It's pretty common that they all recite together. Like after Salat, they'll have a portion and everyone will recite it together. So every so often, everyone who attends Salat will finish reciting the entire Quran because it's like a custom that they have. Recite clearly with a voice that's loud enough so that people can hear. Cover that. Beautifying one's voice. So in addition to reciting each piece properly and correctly, to try to recite as beautifully as possible is a good thing. However, do not be so concerned about reciting beautifully that you don't recite properly. And it's really, really important. I think most people have some sort of style of recitation that they've kind of settled into. It's very important that when you're first learning how to read Quran properly, that you kind of erase that. So if you have a teacher and you're really learning how to read properly, try to read in the most bland way that you can. Because otherwise your accustomed intonations that you're used to doing will actually make it so that you don't put the right emphasis and elongations and stuff like that. And then after you've done it properly, then you can add in whatever intonations you want and stuff, as long as it doesn't break the rules. The rules have to be followed either way. The really good, like people like Abdul Basit and stuff like that, even when they're reading in these really, rahimahullah, in these really, I don't know if performative is the right word, but they're reading in a way that is very beautiful and stuff. They're still following the rules, proper elongation and proper, rules here. Some other reciters, they don't do that. So this is why these people were like the most famous. Shaykh Abdul Basit, Shaykh al-Husri, Shaykh al-Manshawi. When they would read even in their mujawwid style, they still follow all the rules. So elongations would be correct, ikhfa is there, idgham, ghunna, all of these things that need to be there, they're all there. It's good to seek listening to beautiful recitation. It's good to seek listening to beautiful recitation. The more you listen to beautiful recitation, the better your recitation will be too. Because the ear has to become accustomed to hearing things in a particular way. And it can't always pick it up right away. Especially in the beginning, you can't actually distinguish. Many times the teacher will say like, read that again, it wasn't right. You don't even know what your mistake was because the ear doesn't hear it. But the Prophet ﷺ did this, right? He went to Ibn Mas'ud radiallahu anhu and he said, Iqra alayya al-Quran. And he said, Aqra alayka wa alayka unzil. He said, read to me the Quran. He said, I'm going to read it to you and it was revealed to you. Sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam told him that I like to hear it from other than me. I like to hear it from other than me. And so he recited until the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wasallam started crying. So they would get together and they would recite, they would listen to the recitation. Some people might have a more beautiful voice, so you listen to their recitation. It's good. Those are all good things. Another etiquette is that if the person is reading the Quran, they should not stop in the middle of a meaning. This is hard to do if you don't understand the language, but sometimes it happens. Sometimes someone who, especially if they don't speak Arabic, they might stop in places that are not really appropriate to stop in. Sometimes it can be not appropriate in the sense that it's just not good. Like it's the middle of the story and you just stopped in the middle of the story. Sometimes it's inappropriate to the extent that it might actually be like haram. Or if they're praying, it could invalidate the prayer. There's places where if you stop, it completely changes the meaning. So one should just try to be careful with this. Of course, we shouldn't recite the Quran, like you don't recite the Quran in ruku' in sujood. You don't recite the Quran in tashahhud, the end of salat, when you say tahiyyatu lillahi wa salawatu wa tayyibat. That's when you recite those things. You don't recite the Quran in those times. We don't recite the Quran when we're in the restroom. We don't recite the Quran while the khatib is giving the khutbah. Right, these are all not good things to do. Should be careful. It's interesting what he mentions here. He says we should be careful of innovations regarding reciting the Quran. So he says, for example, one of the rejected innovations regarding the recitation of the Quran is what ignorant people do when in Taraweeh they recite Surah Al-An'am in the final rak'ah of the 7th night, believing that it is recommended. So basically the point here is that if we're reciting something from the Quran with some sort of conviction, that it has some sort of benefit, there should be a reason for that, like a sound reason. For example, there's sound hadith that the Prophet ﷺ encouraged people to read Surah Al-Mulk before going to sleep, that there's a protection from the grave in that. And there's different merits for different surahs. Some of them are more clearly established, some of them are more doubtfully established, and some of them are just completely fabricated. So we should just be careful with this. If one is reciting while walking and then comes across other people, it is recommended to interrupt the recitation, greet them, and then resume one's recitation. Interesting, huh? Because when you meet people, they have a right over you. Imagine like if everyone was so pious, mashallah, that they're reciting Quran all the time. Like you come to the majlis, everyone's reciting Quran. So nobody says salam to each other. There's no salam. Just I'm busy with the Quran, brother. I'm busy with the Quran. So it's going to create problems. There's a social order to the existence of the Muslims. If you're reciting Quran to yourself and you're walking, that's great. But if someone comes, you say salam to them. And if they say salam to you, respond to the salam. Yes, sure. He doesn't specify. But assumedly, you shouldn't stop somewhere that's unacceptable to stop, but otherwise, it's probably okay. You go back and continue.
Is it okay if I do that?
Yeah.
Well, you're saying before that don't recite Quran during the Quran. Some people like they come in speaking.
Yeah, so the issue of praying Tahiyyat al-Masjid or the 2 rak'ah of entering the masjid when the khatib is giving the khutbah is not quite the same. So this would be like, what definitely shouldn't be done is someone's just sitting there and then they're reciting the Quran, right? Same thing for dhikr, by the way. Sometimes you see people doing that. You see them making dhikr during the khutbah and stuff. It's not really, some difference of opinion, but it's better that they don't do that. When it comes to praying the 2 rak'ah, I'm going to read this whole section because there's some interesting points here. There's a difference of opinion in the madhabs on whether or not the person should pray 2 rak'ah before sitting down, even if the khatib is giving the khutbah. So they do it, it's okay. In the Hanafi school, you don't do it. You sit down. I think in the Shafi'i school, you do it. Anyone know? Shafi'i school. Huh? Yeah, you do it, but like, and also, if you're gonna do it, like, you're supposed to really do it on the side. Like, maybe you come in, you're in the back, you're on the side, you pray your 2 rakat, then you go sit down wherever you're gonna sit down. The worst thing people do, they want to get in the front, but they have to pray their 2 rakat. They come all the way up right in front of the khatib, Allahu Akbar, and they pray their 2 rakat. Like, do it on the side in the back. It's fun. All right, look at some of the stuff he says here. If one recites while walking and then comes across the other people, it is recommended to interrupt the recitation, greet them, and then resume the recitation. If upon resuming, they say, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim," that's good. If one were sitting and reciting and someone passes by, they should do the same also. If it is obligatory for the reciter to reply to someone else's greeting. So when someone says salam to you, saying salam is recommended, right? Responding to salam is wajib. You have to respond to it. SubhanAllah, there's so much wisdom in that, by the way. So many times we've met people who their feelings are really hurt because they come into community, they say salam, nobody responds to their salam. It really can hurt people. He says, our colleague Imam al-Wahidi said that it is best to refrain from greeting someone who is reciting, and if someone greets the reciter, it is sufficient for them to reply with a gesture. It's not the position that Imam al-Nawawi is taking, but he's mentioning it. So if you see the person reciting, you don't necessarily have to say salam to them. Right? Is the point. If you say salam to them, then now they have to respond. If one sneezes while reciting, they should say alhamdulillah. And someone else, and if they hear someone sneeze and say alhamdulillah, then they should say yarhamakallah, even if they're reciting. If a reciter hears someone making the adhan or the iqamah, they should stop their recitation. If something is requested from a person reciting the Quran and it is possible for him to respond to the petitioner by way of a known gesture, then they could do that. But it is permissible for the reciter to interrupt the recitation and help them. Like they're reciting, they can finish it and they can go help the person. If someone of superior knowledge, righteousness, nobility, old age, or prestige through social status, parentage, or some other factor passes by someone who is reciting, there is no harm in the reciter standing out of respect and deference to greet them. I know we will mention this a lot. This idea that, it's someone of status walks by and you stand up to greet them, that's good. Inshallah, it's okay. There's no harm in joining surahs in a prayer, like to read more than one surah. Read duha, read sharh, and others. He says it's recommended for every reciter while during the prayers or others to say Ameen when finishing Fatiha. So you say Ameen when finishing Fatiha. Of course, there's a well-known difference of opinion on how you say Ameen when you finish the Fatiha. Based on your madhab, do whatever your madhab says. If you think that you're following the Quran or the Sunnah, you're not. You're following the madhab of whoever told you the meaning of that verse from the Quran or the Sunnah. So you're better off finding an actually well-established madhab. Yes, that's a can of worms, but we've talked about it before. Certain times, and of course, you should prostrate, make sujood. There's certain places in the Quran, you read them, you make sujood, right? You'd have wudu in order to do that. It's a sajda like any other sajda. Yes.
About reciting without, are you allowed to recite without or listen?
Yes. Yeah, you can recite or listen without wudu. It's fine. It's fine. Yeah. If you need to make ghusl, that's different. So not having wudu and being in a state where you need to make ghusl are two different things. Yes. You have to have wudu to make the sajda, yes. Well, only in the Hanafi school is the sajda required. So technically, like most of the other madhabs, if you come across sujud tilawa, you don't have to make sujud tilawa. It's recommended. Some people say you can say subhanallah, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar a couple times. In the Hanafi school, it's required, it's wajib. If you read or you hear being read, the sujud tilawa, then you have to make sajda. But it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't have to be immediate. So you could be reciting without wudu, like in the car. Maybe you're in the car, you're driving, you don't have wudu, and you don't have a way to make it, and you want to review something, so you're reviewing it in your head, and you come across a verse where you have to make sujood and you're Hanafi, then when you get out, you make wudu, you make your sujood. Yes, sure.
So you said there's certain periods where you're not allowed to recite Quran. So for example, a woman, like if it's a time of the month, the entire week, she's not allowed to recite Quran. Like she can't even like ayahs of Quran.
According to the majority position, yes. There is in the Maliki school, if she's like a student of the Quran, and how you define the student of the Quran is the question, then she can recite. And then outside of the four madhabs, there's some opinions that allow it. So
like even
that's the brief answer.
Even a minor like recitation, like say she's making a dua before driving the car.
If it's a dua, then she can read it with the intention of dua. It's okay. So like there's du'as from the Quran. Whatever dua it might be. Any dua that is, if they just would do it with the intention of dua. No, it's not applied to this. Technically, in the madhabs, no. So there's multiple issues, right? There's the issue of reciting. There's the issue of touching the mushaf, right? So, as far as I know, in the four madhabs, she cannot even recite, unless except in the Maliki position. As far as I recall, I could be mistaken, but that's as far as I recall. I know it's not a comfortable thing. I'm like saying it and everyone's mad at me. I'm just telling you what it says. I'm just a napkin. I'm just transmitting. Okay. So then touching it is like definitely in the four madhabs. You can't touch without wudu. You can't touch in a state of janaba or state of that time of the month or whatever else it might be. Again, outside of the four madhabs, there are other positions. So sometimes you hear those in the fatwa that people give. Sometimes people give fatwa allowing it, with at varying levels. So. Yeah. For etiquettes, yes. For etiquettes, yes. But on this issue, this is not an etiquette, right? This is if we're just saying the position, like the position of the Hanafi school is the woman who's at her time of the month, she can't recite unless she's saying like a verse for dua or something. So it's not an etiquette; it's an actual hukum. So again, there's what the madhabs say, and then there's some other positions outside the madhabs. You'll get different fatwas on it, but there's positions there. Yes, and you could count it as dua and say it. Like the verses you say at night, you could count it as dua and say it. Yeah. Yes.
I'm curious how that works with like
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So usually what happens So you have different approaches, right? Generally speaking, you have kind of like two approaches. You have the madhabi approach and you have the not so madhabi approach. The not so madhabi approach, in any ways, they already give the fatwa usually that it doesn't apply, that you can recite when you're on your that time of the month. They even give the fatwa you can touch the Quran. So for them, it's not an issue. And I think that a lot of the Islamic schools and stuff were kind of like that approach. If you're on more of like the madhabi approach, usually what will happen is the non-Malikis will say this is an issue where we should follow the Malikis, and they just roll with that. So if you're a student of Quran, you can still recite. So you're still okay. So that's how they would get out of it. And the madhabs do that, by the way. There are issues like even in one's madhab where they'll say, okay, on this issue we follow the other madhab because it's too difficult for people or because whatever. So you can do that. It's not. Alhamdulillah, the religion has different opinions and stuff. We don't have one opinion. So, yes.
So do the madhabs give that scenario, do they have any recommended action for women to make in lieu of how to type the Quran, like being able to touch the Muslim stuff?
Yeah, I mean, they would make dhikr, they make dua, yeah, do anything else. Yeah. I mean, if we're honest, I think a lot of people don't recite the Quran regularly anyways, for to be honest, right? So, yeah, make dhikr, make dua, read Quran. Again, like a question does come up here of like, what makes someone a student of the Quran such that they have the exception? So if you have some sort of relationship with the Quran, most likely if someone has any sort of regular relationship with the Quran, they're going to fall into that category of being considered a student of the Quran, in which case they can take the Maliki position and they can recite. And you can touch a mushaf that like, just get it. Even I usually carry around with me the mushaf that has tafsir in it. Because then like a quarter of the page is the Quran and 3/4 is mushaf. You don't have to have wudu to carry it and touch it and all those other things because it's not mostly Quran. So you can pick up a mushaf like that and read it if you're Maliki and you're a student. If you're not reciting regularly anyways, then you're not a student. You just make dhikr, make dua, whatever. And in a week, become a student, inshallah, and you don't have this issue anymore. That's what I would do. Someone else had their hand up. Yes.
I never heard that said that. We eat that our relationship to it.
Is there any, can you repeat the last part, the detail?
Reward.
It's a good question. MashaAllah. On the first part of the question, the first part of the question was along the lines of basically like when these positions were come to in the madhabs, essentially does like the access that we have to it on phones, on recordings and all these kind of things change it in any way, essentially? Is that kind of, I don't think that it does because they're talking about two issues. One of them is reciting out loud, either from memory or however. And the second is touching the mushaf. So I don't think that it would really affect that. Evidences are the evidences and the practices were the practices. And listening to it is fine anyways, right? So it's issues of questions of touching it would be kind of similar. Yeah, so I would say like if someone is accustomed to reading Surah Al-Kahf every week on their phone, then they're a student of Surah Al-Kahf, and they can read Surah Al-Kahf. Maybe if you can get the phone, I don't know, like sometimes the phone apps, there's ways where you can move it without touching it, but it's still like an image. There's difference of opinion on the image, whether or not it holds the same ruling. So it's okay, inshallah. But in general, like if there's something that we would have done, but we're not doing it because of some rule that we're following, we should believe that Allah will take care of it. Like whatever reward that we were going to get, we're still going to get. Whatever protection we were going to get, we're still going to get. All of those kind of things. The second question was what again? Before I go to the reward, yeah. I don't know of any like particular laid out text on it, but generally speaking, again, if we're prevented from, like for example, it's not exactly the same, but for example, if someone is used to doing something and they can't do it because they get sick, they get the reward of everything they would have done. So whatever reward is established, Yeah. 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 I understand. Yeah, I think Ustad Shazia wrote an article on this one time. I think you might be able to find it online, Shazia Ahmed, on like the issue of Quran and not being able to pray and like what to do and how to. I think she wrote it. She's really good, by the way. If you guys follow her on Instagram, Shazia Ahmed, Ustad Shazia Ahmed. She's really good, mashallah. She has a lot of really good stuff. She's very, very thoughtful, and she's very gifted with words, mashallah. And her husband, Shaykh Arsalan, are really beautiful people, mashallah. I've known them for a long time. Yes, Shri.
I am not in any way super educated on this matter. It's something that was very interesting to me, and I have to give this topic
It's fine.
for so long. But
You should be able to talk about it. It's okay.
I think when Islam came, a lot of very cultural ideas in other religions came from this specific topic. There's a lot of ideas that a woman who's on her period is unclean and many of these things. And Islam actually doesn't say to that extent of this uncleanness or almost unholiness of the woman during that time. We celebrate women who are, it's what God has created. It's fine. But I think a lot of those cultural aspects came that comes with our Islamic understanding, and I think it's again, like I said, I don't have much knowledge on this, but from what I have read and what I have understood, I think it's very important, especially for women, to read up on what exactly it means to be during this time of the month and how those implications are as opposed to I think other understandings and beliefs.
Yeah.
A lot of women will think that maybe they're just like not worthy in so many senses, which is not something that Islam ever presented.
Right.
And so yes, you have respect to it, but it doesn't mean that you yourself are something that should be taken aspect, because that's not true. And I think a lot of culture that you have to distinguish very, very harshly that it's not a part of Islam, because a lot of us don't know what we tend to believe.
Right. Right.
Just to quickly add to that, I think it's also helpful to frame it in like settings like these on it should be framed in the sense of like this is an ni'mah that Allah is giving us, it's a mercy that He's giving us during this time because of the things that our bodies are going through. And so it's Allah like showing us mercy, and it's something that we should like like shouldn't say like it shouldn't be something that we look down on, or it's like oh like accessible, like have access to frame it in the sense of like
Right. It's part of the human condition. Right. It's not like, yeah, it's true that there's a lot of other religions and cultures that have a lot of like negativity around this topic. We do have some rulings around it, right? Like there's some clear rulings, but they're not associated with like, oh, you're bad or you're less or you're anything like that at this time of the month type thing. You know. Alhamdulillah.
Cultural context that trying to the closer to sometimes women are especially and like they're gonna sit out.
Mhm.
I think it's the same though, because there's something that's
But they have control over it.
yeah.
And it's like it's not something that's gonna like last, right? Outside of your control.
I mean, something I feel like me, so like, oh, we pray 5 times a day. Yeah, but you know, during like women's like prayers and all, they're like, why? And I was like, oh, this is and it's something that usually when I see that they see it, they're like, oh, like your religion is about that, like those little things. Like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense because during that time, like that is one great word.
Yeah. Not everything's an easy sell. Well, I mean, that's the way I feel. I mean, I don't. Not everything is an easy sell, but I feel that a lot of things, if we own it and we think about it and we try to find some wisdoms for ourselves and stuff that really resonates with us, then we can share it with other people from a place of authenticity. And if they accept it, they accept it. If they don't, they don't. I mean, I've definitely had times in my life where I wished I had a week off from praying a month. You know, like where I just don't have to pray this week. I feel like, man, that's great. I don't have to pray this week. Yeah, so, but it's I mean, I understand. I don't want to like. Obviously, I'm not experiencing it, so it's a little bit different. You know, I don't want to say too much about it, but I think that we frame it like prayer is an obligation, and there's certain times when it's not an obligation on you. Alhamdulillah, so you don't have to do it. And we can connect to Allah in many different ways, and many ways to talk to Him and to know Him and to worship Him and to seek Him. And, but
And experience the same thing. You're in a state of purity. Right?
yeah, but like I said, you control that in a sense, right? So like when men are in a state of impurity that makes it so that they can't pray or touch Quran or read Quran or anything like that, you might ghusl and it's gone. You don't have to like wait 5 days for the time for ghusl to come and then, you know, this type of thing. So it's a little bit different, but in any case, alhamdulillah. I would imagine over dinner, you all can figure out good answers to this, inshallah. That's why we have dinner, by the way, is so that we can talk about these things. We can come up with answers for them and think about ways that make sense for us and how we frame it and how we think about it and all of that. That's good. It's good to have these conversations. Yes.
After saying, I mean, you mentioned that you have to repeat sometimes on praying. Be a little bit distracted, so.
Yeah, there is. In the Shafi'i school, you have to recite Surah Al-Fatiha. So if you're in an out loud prayer, you don't recite it while the Imam is reciting. After everyone says Ameen, you recite it then. Before they do the next surah. Before the next surah, you do it really fast. But that's why they do it. So in the Shafi'i school, you have to recite Fatiha for the prayer to be valid, even if you're behind the Imam who's reading out loud. So that's why people do it. But they should try to do it in a way that's not distracting to everyone else. Yes.
I have three questions. They're all kind of different. The first one is like before saying Bismillah, are you required to say, or is there any etiquette with saying basically that, and especially during prayer, is there any etiquette about using that like before you start reciting in prayer? The second
And quickly, just really quickly, the short is it's recommended. It's not required, both inside and outside.
Second one is related to correction. So you had mentioned like if you're reciting Quran and like you're not like let's say you're praying with someone that doesn't necessarily know that they're not reciting like the surah correctly, and you know the surah, are you supposed to correct them during prayer? Like, especially if you're like as a female, like you're not leading prayer correct.
Yeah. Just
Like they say the wrong word, and like they're using a different word, or they're missing a verse or something.
yeah. Generally, for women, if they're correcting, then they stop their hand. If they're
They're
not,
not supposed to recite.
hold on. Yeah. Even for men, though, by the way, like people overcorrect. Like if it's not changing the meaning, if it's not some sort of big mistake, it's really not necessary to correct.
They're missing a verse though. They're missing a verse. They're using the wrong word. That's not necessarily changing. I mean, it could or could not change the meaning. Like, you know what I mean?
Just,
Okay.
yeah.
And then
Unless it's your family, I think there's a difference of opinion on that. If it's like, say, a wife praying with her husband, I recall finding it somewhere. I should go find it again, but that she can actually say it out loud.
And then I guess the third question I had was in prayer, like the first two rak'ahs, you're supposed to recite like the second surah, or at least is what I think. First you're supposed to recite your Aisha, and then the second two you're only supposed to recite with Etiquette. Is that like a true thing? I never like. I think someone told me I don't kind of know, and I just always follow that. I just wanted to know.
Yeah. Yes. Roughly, yes. The general thing is to Fatiha and a surah in the first two rak'ah. And if there's more than that, 3 or 4, then just Fatiha. It's the general thing. Yeah. Some exceptions, some differences, but that's the general rule. Anything else anyone has? We're going to stop here, so you can feel free to answer. I'm going to ask your questions up front.
Asking, so, is there like is it supposed to pray just 3 rak'ahs together, or 2 rak'ahs?
Oh man. So the thing is with all this stuff, like even this section I'm not going to read in there because like Imam Al-Nawawi he's Shafi'i. So all of the guidance that he's going to give based on sujood of reciting Quran and stuff like that is all going to be about how to do it in the Shafi'i school. The reason why I'm saying that is because all things related to these details, you're going to find difference of opinions. So that's why it's kind of hard to answer sometimes. So can you repeat your question again?
So, when you're praying with
What's it?
pray 3 rak'ahs together, 2 rak'ahs.
Yeah. So again, yeah, it depends on your method. Hanafis pray 3 rak'ah the way you pray Maghrib. With the sitting after the second, getting up for the third, but they add a surah after Fatiha in the third. And then they make qunut before ruku', and then you make ruku'. I think what most people are accustomed to praying in the masajid and stuff is more of like a Shafi'i way, which is you pray 2 rak'ah, then you say salam, and you pray 1 rak'ah, and you do the qunut after ruku', right? You do the dua after ruku', which is the Shafi'i way. Hanbali way also. I'm not really sure how Malikis pray with it actually. It's the one madhab I haven't read a text in.
Can you actually explain a little bit about like the different madhab and how they came up with like these different, I guess, ideas or ways that I think should be followed? Just like a quick, brief, high level summary. I know it can get really complicated, so I'm curious.
It's an important question. It's an important question. And it should be, one should come up with a way to answer it in a brief, high-level way that's sufficient. It's just hard. The very brief of it is that obviously we have the Quran, we have the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and sometimes those are very clear, sometimes they're less clear, sometimes they lend to very little interpretation, sometimes they lend to a lot of interpretation, especially when it comes to the Sunnah. Some hadith might be more strong or less strong for any number of reasons. And so the four madhabs represent kind of like established methodologies for interpreting the Quran and the Sunnah that have been worked through for centuries. So it's not only the imam of the school, but their students and their students' students and everyone else who have worked through the positions of the school and the reasoning and looked at the evidences and used the methodology of the imam to come to conclusions on what would be the closest to the practice of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so because there are oftentimes a number of hadith on these issues, they might come to different conclusions as to what is the most correct.
But are they all based off of like, I guess, hadith that are like, there's some hadith that are not really, I don't know if they're not correct or whatever.
They're less reliable or more reliable.
Yeah, so are they all based on the ones that are like reliable and then there's still a difference?
All the madhabs are based on acceptable sources, say that. Even the question of reliability of hadith and stuff is not always as clear as people think it is. So for example, when we're looking at the positions of madhabs, say we're looking at the position of the Hanafi school on issue X, and someone will come and say, well, there's a hadith that says such and such and it's reliable, it's an authentic hadith, and it's different than what the position of the school is. Okay, but that hadith is reliable in a collection of hadith that was established in like 250 after Hijrah. Not that it wasn't there before, but the collection itself is in 250 after Hijrah. And Abu Hanifa lived in 100 after Hijrah. Like literally, if he heard something, his teachers, their teachers were Sahaba. So like, it's not always that like the evidence, maybe the evidence that Abu Hanifa was working with didn't end up in the hadith collection. This doesn't mean he didn't have an evidence. So there's a lot of like, this is where it starts to get really complicated. But
There was no school of thought before, like, what do they follow?
they followed the scholars from the Sahaba, basically. They followed the madhabs from the Sahaba. So there were Sahaba who were more knowledgeable, and they would follow them. So like Ibn Abbas was the reference in Mecca, and Ibn Umar was the reference in Medina, Umar was the reference in Medina, Ali's a reference in Iraq, Ibn Mas'ud is a reference in Iraq. And they would differ on things. And actually most of the differences that we find between the madhabs were differences that go back to the Sahaba. So like the Hanafi school will say X and Shafi'i school will say Y. And we look at it and we say, oh, it's Hanafi and Shafi'i. But actually it's like Ibn Umar and Ibn Mas'ud and Zayd said this, and I don't know, Ibn Mas'ud and whatever other Sahaba said this. So even the Sahaba differed on a number of things. If there's, especially after the death of the Prophet ﷺ, there's no way to say categorically this is what it is, right? So people have to work with what they have and come to what they believe to be most correct based on the body of evidences. That's essentially what the whole thing is. And that's why generally, we try to stick with the madhabs, but sometimes we go outside of them to other madhabs that are not as well established. Like there's other madhabs. They just haven't reached us in the same way that the four madhabs did. The four madhabs reach us with like tremendous amount of transmission and analysis and assessment and everything else. Whereas other madhabs, they don't reach us in the same way, but we might know the opinion. Madhab, the word, it just means basically the position that someone took, what they went to. ذهب إلى كذا وكذا في مسألة كذا وكذا. Like this is the position that they deem to be most sound on this issue. So it's an important topic. I think Shaykh Fuad has covered a lot of it in his Wednesday class. This is what his Wednesday class is about. The development of Islamic thought, not just in fiqh. This is right now, we're talking about law, but also in theology, philosophy, stuff like that. So I think he's covering all of this in his class. Yes. Sorry.
One more question about
Yeah.
that. What about female scholars? Like, were there, I guess, in each of the madahib, they have input from women on a lot of these topics where, you know, a lot of, like, obviously, during the time of the Prophet, there was Lord Aisha, and like, all these other women that were Sahaba, basically. So, did they take input from those sources?
Yeah, where women scholars were there, their positions were taken. And they're, most of these imams, they had women teachers, like at some point or other. Imam Shafi'i, Imam Malik, especially in the realm of hadith, they took these knowledges. But, there's issues of interpretation. Every now and then there's probably some bias that creeps in. But bias is not going to creep into like everybody, So if there's difference of opinion, we can say, okay, well, this position maybe seems better for our circumstances than this one. It's fine. But usually if like everyone agrees, then it's hard to say that there was some sort of bias that they had, whether it's gender-based or there could be other biases as well, right? But that's why the what's that word? Like the sanctity is not in the individual positions. The sanctity is in the consensus of the ummah. So if the Prophet ﷺ said it, obviously, it's sacred. If the Quran said it, it's sacred. And if everybody agreed upon it, it's sacred. Otherwise, you have difference of opinion, You can't remove it. And there were female scholars at various stages in different places, sometimes more, sometimes less, for different reasons, So alhamdulillah. Part of the reason why we follow these madhabs actually is because they follow a methodology rather than, so when you have a methodology that's been followed by thousands of people over hundreds of years, bias is a lot less likely rather than just like one person's opinion on this thing or whatever, And the madhabs are not, again, they're not just the imam, but they're the body of people throughout the centuries. And the positions will many times change over time on issues. Some issues won't change, some issues will change. We mentioned last time the idea of reciting the Quran for getting paid for teaching Quran. The early Hanafi school doesn't allow it. Later school allows it. So it's still in the Hanafi school. So they work through these things. Yeah. So we have ritual impurity, we have physical impurity. Okay, first issue as a general breakdown. There's ritual impurity, there's physical impurity. Physical impurity is like blood, vomit, feces. These things are all physically impure, right? And then there's ritual impurity, which is a state of impurity that comes as a result of things that are established in text. Like we don't make it up ourselves, it's a matter of revelation, right? So Allah and the Prophet tell us that if we're going to pray, we need to be in a state of ritual purity. How do we do that? We make wudu, we make ghusl. There's certain things that take us out of wudu or ghusl, essentially. So ritual impurity looks like, for a man, many of the ways, like usual things, if you pass gas, if you bleed, depending on your madhab, if you use the restroom, if you have some sort of like discharge, seminal discharge, if you have these kind of things would put a person in a state of ritual impurity, which would be resolved by either ghusl, the full body wash, or wudu, depending on what it is. It's the most, trying to answer in a really brief way. Inshallah. Shaykh Fuad has taught Maliki fiqh at the Majlis. You can find the recordings online. I've taught Hanafi fiqh at the Majlis. You can find recordings online if you really want to do it. And there's other places you can do it as well. IOK has good classes on that. Seeker's Guidance has classes on it. A lot of people do. Inshallah. Yes.
I recently learned that there are some of that but I guess some of that are women supposed to recite the end?
Good question. Hmm. I don't know exactly. I'm not sure. By the way, if you say Ameen loud enough that the person next to you can hear you, you said it out loud. So, as a technical definition in the fiqh, to say something silently is that you say it so that only you can hear it and no one next to you can hear it. And if you say it out loud, it's loud enough that the person next to you can hear it. So if women are praying together and they say Ameen out loud, it's out loud. It's probably okay. I mean, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly in the fiqh. Unless if you want to eat, eat. We officially close. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت نستغفرك ونتوب إليك والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات. Please eat if you want to eat. If you want to ask more questions, please feel free to ask more questions. Yes. Where are your more questions? How come nobody asked more questions after we officially close? It creates a little bit of a dichotomy, a little bit of an issue. That's true.
I have a question.
Yes.